We're going to turn now to the work of another scientist and engineer whose work follows in the tradition established by Hubel and Wiesel, who had developed, as we saw, this view of perceptual processing as the incremental construction of representations from sensory primitives. David Marr worked in the field of computational vision, and this was made possible by the advent of computers. He died in 1980, and so this was an emerging field. And within this field, vision was seen clearly as a form of information processing. That's the model they're working with, in which the patterns of light on the retina are presumed to be inputs, and the final result is some kind of a three-dimensional model of the world. Now, how that is to be understood remains to be seen. So he more or less single-handedly founded the field of computer vision, which is still extremely active today. All the face recognition software in your phones, every system that uses the automatic analysis of digitally captured images is building on David Marr's work. And he drew in turn from Hubel and Wiesel's constructive approach to representations. Now, Marr's main contribution from a theoretical point of view was a distinction he drew between three different ways that you can understand a problem. Now, of course, we have an infinity of problems we can characterize. The kind of problem he's dealing with can only be expressed in this computational vocabulary. So supposing, for example, we have a small robot and we have equipped it with a camera sensor, and we want to understand. I suppose the robot was trained by expert scientists from 100 years later, and the robot exhibits all kinds of amazing abilities. It goes around and avoids obstacles and seems to be situation aware, is respectful to people. There's all kinds of things, and you look at the robot and you go, well, how does it do that? The how does it do that question requires you to say what it is, what that is. What is it that you think it's doing? And this is an expression, a formal expression of the problem that you think that a given system, like a robot, has solved. So the computational level of description basically says, well, it's getting these inputs and it's producing these outputs. That is on the basis of what's going on at the camera sensor and the movement of the body, perhaps. We see this kind of behavior emerging. So that's a very abstract form of description. And it's absolutely not trivial to come up with a description like that. I'm having difficulty here myself. So remember that a question like, how do you see, is not a well-formed question. We need to be much more specific. So the computational level attempts to be specific here by tying the description of the problem to the overall relation of the system under consideration, viewed as taking in inputs and producing outputs. Now, given a good computational description, if you have identified a problem which we might agree is being solved somehow in this system, the algorithmic level is quite different. That goes and describes how the system actually solves the problem using algorithmic terms. Now, algorithmic terms means using logical constructions which make distinctions, following rules, following a logical sequence of steps in order to implement the computational statement. So the computational statement is, this is the problem that this seems to be solving. That is, we need to understand this particular mapping. The algorithmic level is the level at which a programmer would work, and writing functions, databases, having variables, indices. Those are all means of representing the problem and passing them around, transforming representations according to rule. This is what goes on inside your computer, of course. So let me take my computer as a thing, where on one hand, I can come up with a computational account. Somehow your computer right now is magically displaying a video. So when you describe what a video is, you have a computational level. The algorithmic level then will describe things like matrices, algorithmic choices, sequences, and so on. And that would be typically in a computer would be expressed in a computer language like C or Java. And then there's another level at which exactly the same system can be described. So we're talking about one system considered at three different levels. The third level is the physical level. How is it actually realized? In the case of your computer, we're talking about the silicon and steel and metal and copper and so on from which it's built. In the case of the robot, we're talking about the parts, the hardware. And in the case of the person, we would be talking in this case about a biological organism. Now, Marr's insight was that it's possible to work at any one of these three levels independently of the others. That is, you could spend your entire career trying to describe what people do. That's the computational level. Given a particular characterization of what it is that they do, you could work on an algorithmic implementation of that. And then, of course, your algorithms are worth nothing unless they can run on something. Now, this approach allowed for separation of many kinds of problems. There are dependencies among these. If we get the computational description wrong, I'm not sure what we're doing at the algorithmic and the physical level. But this has proved very fruitful and has given rise to yet the huge field of computer vision. You can see some of the effects of this work when you encounter something like this on the web. This is a CAPTCHA. You've all met them. In a CAPTCHA, you are presented with a visual problem, a visual display, which you have to interpret using your human common sense. And the goal is for the system to distinguish between a person using the system and an algorithm using the system. The algorithm might be Russian propaganda bots, criminals trying to phish, automated engines that will just clog up the entire internet if they're allowed access to your site. So the goal is it's a kind of a Turing test challenge. The goal is to come up with something which can distinguish humans from non-humans. And you will have noticed, if you've been paying attention for several years to this kind of thing, the CAPTCHAs consistently evolve. In fact, they're going away at this stage because we've gone about as far down this route as we can. In this case, you can clearly see we're giving a blurry image and asked to recognize the characters JUGQ7L. This one's not very difficult, but you will have encountered captures that are very difficult. And the reason is that there's been an arms war going on between people in the field of computational vision, on the one hand, and people designing systems that wish to distinguish between humans and non-humans on the other hand. And this led to the situation where the computational vision approaches were as good or better than the humans at solving the problems that come up. That's why so many captures these days exhibit some kind of lateral thinking. They keep coming up with new, unexpected ways to challenge you. So it turns out that a lot of the things that we find very easy have proved very hard to do for computers, but it also turns out that a lot of things that we find quite difficult are much easier than computers. We don't seem to share the same problem space with computers. Now, Marr, of course, was really interested in actual biological vision. He accidentally found about it. It happened that he founded the field of computational vision, which has gone into this strange state where we're presented with captures. But really, Marr wanted to understand how we see. And at the back of his thinking was trying to figure out this interplay between what is available on the camera sensor or retina, because that's their equivalent in this view, and what the cognitive abilities and capacities of the system involved are. So we noted before that what you see is a function of your entire understanding. We could call that your world knowledge, your expectation of what you're going to see, the attention you pay to various things. All of these come from you. And then, of course, there's the play of light on your retina. And the Hubel and Wiesel approach showed to a large extent, how one could begin to interpret a pattern of light and dark on something like a retina, building up from simple characteristics like edges or sensitivity to motion, and then incrementally constructing more complex representations. So that's the bottom-up approach. Start simple and build up towards more meaningful representations. But Marr knew, of course, that what we see is affected by what we know as well, what we're paying attention to, our knowledge. And this interplay between top-down and bottom-up factors fascinated him. The fact that what you see depends on your knowledge might not be obvious to you. So let me do a little illustration. I'm not sure whether you can see anything here. You can see the words perceptual coherence, but can you see what this image is? If you've met it before, you probably can. And I'm going to show you an image now, which will change your understanding of this image. There's the image I'm going to show you. It's a frog. Now you see the frog. So if I have no way of knowing what's going on with you. This works fairly well in class. If you did not see this originally as a frog and you now see it as a frog, then we will have illustrated the fact that your knowledge and history affect what you see. Now, an awful lot of work is done in this tradition, and the tradition is bifurcated. So people who are studying computational vision, building face recognition algorithms for security services for authoritarian states, have no interest in how humans see or what it is to see. And an awful lot of this work has detached itself from the original concerns with biological vision and human vision. On the other hand, this work stems from such concerns. So we live at the moment in a state where most contemporary cognitive neuroscience uses this kind of approach, relying on a notion of a specific kind of input, a specific kind of output, and understanding things in terms of information processing without qualification. That is a problem. We are beginning to mix up our understanding of ourselves with what we have created in machines. On this very orthodox and nonetheless problematic view, perception involves the construction of representations through the analysis and combination of sensory inputs, together with the top-down effects of knowledge and expectations. That's the heart of the view of perception adopted within the computational theory of mind.